Welcome, everyone, to our panel discussion of the using geospatial analytics for real estate and retail sectors. So I'm Kannappan. I work for Google Cloud. I work on big data and analytics and focusing primarily on geospatial analytics using products like BigQuery and Google Earth Engine. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Patel, UK Head of Innovation and Insight for Avison Young, which is a commercial real estate firm. I'm probably the least technical person in this room. It's mine and my team's responsibility to essentially partner with people like Clifford, interpret the data for our clients to be able to make sort of better decisions, more informed decisions around their real estate portfolios.
Good afternoon. My name's Clifford. I'm the founder of Doorda, and we specialize in the aggregation of public data sets. So roughly about 1,500 data publishers all release data on different standards and formats. So we aggregate, link the data, combine it, so you can just pull data on a company name, an address, or a location, and do your own analysis.
Great. So we have a few questions on which we will discuss about, covering topics like what is the role of geospatial analytics in retail and real estate, and how it compares with other sectors, and how has COVID affected the whole process of using geospatial in the retail and real estate. And also, we'll touch up on the opportunities and difficulties of the next generation using tools like the metaverse and virtual shopping malls and so on. So let's get started. What do you feel is the role of geospatial analytics in this retail and real estate?
Do you want me to go first? Yeah. So, I mean, from our perspective, what we're trying to do is make locations more transparent with regards to kind of helping our clients to make better informed decisions around their real estate portfolio. So when they want to make decisions around sort of site selection, obviously, you know, the data and being able to analyze it in a sort of geospatial format is really important and pertinent. We've spoken to and we've heard from people like SafeGraph today, so understanding points of interest and how sort of they impact an area is becoming increasingly important from a real estate decision maker's perspective, particularly when you think about site selection and occupiers thinking about where they locate themselves, either from a real estate retail perspective or from an office location perspective. So there are a number of use cases in that area that we're kind of working with our clients on.
From my perspective, I would say that there's a lack of data available in the market. So there's a lot of silos around, and there's a lot of very talented, skilled people with a lot of very good tools, such as Carto and yourself or your team, who actually need data to create their own insights. So you don't want an off-the-shelf insight that everyone else is using in the market. So our objective is to get all these different data sources from local authorities, VOA, land registry, combine it together, and then empower people to build their own insights on top of that data. But joining it and linking it to pain in the backside, as I think we all know. So that's what we try to do.
What kind of attributes do you think are important while doing this analysis? Let's say, for example, you want to place a site somewhere, or?
That depends on the question. I've been asked how many pitched roofs there are in the UK, which I managed to answer, which was quite a good one. I think it depends on what you're after. I mean, certainly in terms of the commercial location data, it could be people looking at the moving of office space into mixed use, certainly in town centres, or I think 80% of the CNAs, which shut down about 10 years ago, it must be about that, are still sat empty because they're such large buildings. People don't know what to do with them. So things like, inside golf courses, climbing walls, eating courts, that kind of thing go through. But you need to also understand what's happening in the area around us. What are the takeaways are there? What are the food outlets are there? What's the flow of traffic coming through a place? And also, how many people actually are coming into that location to work? And what can you slice and dice? And also look at the occupancy and the use cases behind all them locations. And there is so much data. It's a very hard thing to analyze and spend time on. So you need to be quite specialist in that area.
I completely agree. I think the POI data is really, really important. We've heard a lot about ESG, and that continues to be another area which we're getting asked a lot about is, how can we help our clients reach some of their net zero carbon targets? How can we better understand things like cooling and shading? So, I've recently understood from my sustainability team the importance of tree canopy coverage in relation to a building, because obviously it impacts how a building's shaded and cooled down, and then obviously that impacts on the energy performance of the building. So those kinds of data sets are increasingly important. And then another one that I think has become, again, very front of mind at the moment is around talent investigation, particularly diversity of talent. I think if I think about the sort of corporates that I've been working with, getting a diverse talent workforce is becoming increasingly important. And so for our clients to be able to assess from a talent perspective where that talent pool is going to come from and access to that diverse talent, that's becoming increasingly important in some of that decision making as well.
Sure. So how do you go about like collecting data? Let's say, for example, you want to find out you want to do some market segmentation or something like that. Like, what are the different places where you would collect your data from?
Well, we mainly take from public. So we actually contact each individual local authority to find out information on who's occupying an address from a commercial perspective. So is it a Boots, is it McDonald's, whatever it may be. We then take that company name and then link it to a company's house to get their company number, which allows you to then look across the whole of the UK and see how many locations they have in a particular place. But in terms of joining it, we had to actually create bespoke joining algorithms to connect it, and also maintaining and updating and refreshing that data is the hard part, because data analysts and scientists hate playing with data. They really want to get their hands into the modeling and the visualizations and the scoring. The downloading of spreadsheets and connecting it is quite a painful process for anyone to do who's ever touched it. So I think the hardest part is making it consumable and usable. And then once you see lots of nice little tidy tables, it's great fun then diving in and adding all your variables up and then running scores against it and augmenting it with your own data.
Sure. Have you seen any like significant success from any of your customers or within your company by using like geospatial data?
Yeah, I can think of one particular case. There are many, but one that comes to mind at the moment is we were advising a retail investor client of ours who was very much thinking in the kind of traditional sense around what's the optimum tenant mix, utilizing mobility data and understanding customer flows. We were able to basically talk to them about how they should shift their tenant mix more towards service orientated, which seems like a very obvious area that we should be moving into, but they weren't necessarily thinking along those lines, and just, utilizing that type of mobility data just to kind of understand where the cold spots and hot spots in that particular center were, but also where their customers were going afterwards and potentially the sort of gaps that were in their service offering that they could, attract occupiers into their shopping center.
In terms of more practical, well, I wouldn't say more practical. In another use case, I would say, everyone's obviously paying more for their electric now. So there's quite a big interest in the EPC data, which is an address level. I think there's about 25 million odd addresses within that data. And that tells you how a house is insulated, what energy rating it is, whether they're using oil, gas, electric, and what price they're paying on average. So what you can do is consolidate that data, and Carto are actually building an app for us, or we're working with Carto to develop an app. So at an OA area, which is an output area, which is roughly about 650 households, you can then see what the energy rating is and what's being used within that area, and then cross-reference that with the deprivation index. So you can see whether rich areas, poor areas, badly educated, well-educated, whatever it may be. And then as a marketing tool or a way of local authorities or government to then find out whether it should be targeting green spend, where that money should be going.
Interestingly, that's a key area that we've been working on recently, just because of the MEES legislation that's coming into play.
My data.
Yeah. The MEES legislation that's coming into play in the next couple of years, and how local authorities and particularly certain investors and occupiers are going to be affected with regard to their portfolio not meeting the legislative standards that are coming into play. So again, another use case around local authorities, but also investors, and how their portfolios are going to be affected, and what they're going to need to do in order to get their portfolios up to MEES standards.
Sure. Do you think in terms of data, is there enough data? And the problem only is there in like gathering them together? Or do you feel like organizations like the governments can actually do something about like increasing the data that is publicly consumable?
I'm sure you can ask anyone in the room, there's never enough data. We always need more to come out. I think the problem with the way government releases data is they focus on a sector. So if you're NHS, you release data based on an LSOA, because that's where they capture and put the GPs and release data information. Whereas if you want to do location analysis, you're more interested in a lat long, so you can pinpoint exactly where the data is. Yep. Now, lat long for an address is actually licensed from Ordnance Survey, so it's not publicly available. and the address is licensed from Royal Mail. So you have to join the two together to actually create a licensed product you can take out into the market, which I'm sure a lot of people know. Really, Royal Mail shouldn't have been privatized with addresses, but they were. So you have to pay for that data. I'll be arguing that should be released and made more freely available. UPRNs are now available, but the linking to addresses isn't freely available under open source. So there's a lot of complexity the way government does it. Generally, government's not really that bothered unless you bang their door and keep on shouting at them, which is what I try to do on a regular basis.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think one of the key challenges is linking data sets, and you've identified a key problem that we have at the moment, which is address matching, the very big problem with UPRN and that not being publicly available. So I agree, it's not that there's not enough data, it's that there's huge challenges around how you link different data sets together to actually make it meaningful.
And when you scale up to like Royal Mail, for example, it's 34.5 million addresses roughly in their data set. If you're trying to match something to that, you can't use things like fuzzy logic, because you can't have, here's the 10 best matches for an address 34 million times. It's impossible. So you have to use more like binary, yes, no, direct matches or not, before you can actually go through it. So most companies do data matching. They'll match probably the first 50% using one tool, 25% would be the next tool, and then the final 10% tend to be someone sat on the screen looking at this and that, and then joining it left and right, which is a problem we've solved, because we've got a global patent on deterministic matching, which we find quite successful so far with our clients.
Sure. And in terms of like tools, right? Do you think is there anything that like people here could actually develop and put it out into open source? Is there any specific areas that you feel that the tooling is lacking? Okay.
I'll go for it then. I would say probably not. There's a big, huge drive into AI and ML, which is a fascinating subject area and use case, but I think it's very over hyped in terms of what the actual outcome is from it, because the data that goes into it has to be of a certain quality, and the biggest issue is quality data going into these things. And as more data comes in the market, it's siloed, so it's not connected and joined, so you can't really feed it into the models in a proper way. They're also quite biased in terms of the people who are feeding the data in. It's all very white male. A lot of the cases, same as the facial recognition information, which is always very focused on white males as well. So I think in terms of getting the tools out into the market, there's loads of free stuff out there. I'd be amazed if whatever you're thinking of doing, there's not a tool out there to do it already. And also Carto as well, I should say, since they're sponsoring the event.
Sure. Cool. So let's go on to the next topic. So now we talked about the retail sector. What do you feel like, how about the other sectors? Like, what do you feel like geospatial analytics, like how can it help? How can the other sectors learn from whatever advances that have been made in, let's say, the retail sector? And also like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think some of the other real estate sectors are already looking at sort of geospatial analysis to help them with decision making. We talked earlier about sort of talent investigation. That comes to front of mind. That's pertinent at the moment with regards to how companies are making decisions on where they locate their offices, but it also impacts the healthcare sector with regards to analyzing the market for from an NHS perspective and investing in GP practices, from an industrial standpoint as well around the labour market, commute analysis for again office strategies. So I think there are lots of lessons to be learned from what we've already seen geospatial analysis being applied in retail.
I was reading something about Hammerson the other day, who apparently 90% of their shopping malls at the moment are retail, and they're trying to bring that down to 50%. So they want a lot of residential stuff in there, and they want people eating more, but activities, so things like cinemas, bowling alleys, climbing walls, trampoline centers. Have you ever been to one? I nearly broke my back on one. But all these things they want to bring into these stores, which is great. However, you need to know what's happening in the area around it. So is there another trampoline store across the road? Is there enough presence within that area to actually sustain them kind of people? What pricing can you go through in terms of charging it? How do you apply for a reuse of premises, which you need from the local authority, and then get it recategorized with the business rates? And obviously, we've got the big business mate review coming up at the moment, which is ongoing, which is going to be released next year. And I'm sure there'll be a whole ball game of arguments. Should they be charging this coming in? And then you're also looking at an e-commerce tax, which I think they're introducing, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because most shops, no matter how small, will also have a website. So you're punishing people in a small shop online, as well as through paying business rates, so they're being taxed twice. So I think there's a bit of complexity around how you actually redefine how town centres and shopping malls are going to be used.
I think it applies to space in general. It's how is space being used and what's the purpose of that space, and in a very real estate centric way, what's the value of that space. So work that we're doing at the moment with regards to what's the optimum workplace strategy, how is space being used, utilizing mobile phone data and kind of occupancy data. It's understanding how frequently people come to the office, what are they coming for, and do we have the surrounding facilities and amenities to facilitate those requirements, and what impacting the future of the workplace. What does that workplace look like? What is it that people want from the office when they think about coming to the office? So that's becoming increasingly important.
I think it was Stockton as well as local authority who bought 2 shopping malls in town centre because they virtually shut down. And they flattened one, put a park in, and then focused all their attention on the rest of the high street because there's just too much retail space. And the park actually brought in more people than them redoing some retail space because they can now walk down to the river, you can have a little picnic, have a coffee, they've got little cafes there, but it's about a quarter less retail space in the town, but you're getting more people going into it because it's a more pleasant environment.
More place-making initiatives.
Great, yeah, you touched upon an important point in today's world where hybrid working and people coming into the office more is like an offsite rather than on-site, right? So, and work from home, right? And people have moved away from the city and live further outside. How do you think that impacts, like, for example, like Pret or some of these other stores that rely on people being here on site?
Well, it's going to impact their strategy and the way that they think about what their optimum strategy is across the UK. I think that there's a much more sense of localization now with hybrid working. We've almost seen in certain areas a revitalization of local high streets. So it's impacted those high streets in a very positive way, and therefore will people like Pret, as you say, make them rethink, I suppose, their strategy for growth.
I would say it was always going to fail anyway. I mean, how many Prets do you need in the world? There's so many coffee shops coming out. Every market realigned at some time or another anyway, regardless of it being coffee, pubs, whoever it may be. There's always going to be change and transformation. There was too much retail space. There were too many restaurants in the middle of the market. There was always going to be a shakedown. It just happened much more quickly. So rather than that happening over 10 years, it's been pushed down into 2 years. It's what you do with the space that counts. So I think it needs to be more smaller office space for smaller companies rather than these big co-working spaces. I think there'd be more independent retailers, more independent shops, more reasons for going into them. There's got to be a reason for going into a shop now rather than just getting a coffee and then walking into the office. And offices themselves, as if you've ever been one in London now, they're more like entertainment centres. You've got slides, you've got big parks, and people still aren't going into them because they'd rather sit at home behind their screen. And I think by nature, we're all quite lazy. We'd all like to sit in front of a screen, but it's healthy for us as individuals to go out and work. So maybe we need some electric chairs at home that push you out of your seat and force you to go into the office now and again.
People need a reason for going in, don't they, now into the office? So it might be to socialize, it might be to have face-to-face meetings, but the world that we are moving towards, you need a reason to go into the office now. So back to your point around kind of the rethinking of shopping malls and kind of the services that are offered there. I think the same is true to be said of the sort of local high streets. You'll need much more service-orientated local high streets as well.
Sounds good. So in terms of like, since we're talking about location, do you think like the UK and European market is different from, let's say, an Asian market or a North American market? And is there any particular differences between these markets while people here do geospatial analytics?
In terms of retail, I think if we look at North America, they've always been more service-orientated in terms of their retail destinations. You get more healthcare facilities, more service-driven facilities within shopping malls in a way that you haven't in the UK. It's slightly different in Europe. And I think there are nuances between Southern Europe and like Northern Europe with regards to why people shop. And therefore, you'll see subtle differences in kind of the retail mix there. The same is true of Asia. The tenant mix of these centers looks very different to the UK and to North America in that, again, they've got more F&B facilities, more service-driven facilities in those shopping centers.
Cool. So let's close this with the final question about like the future, right? What is this next generation thinking of like metaverse and virtual worlds and virtual shopping malls, indoor mapping, and those kind of things? Like how would that like impact? Let's say you're going to build a store. Like, is your store going to be like only for demonstration, right? Say like Tesla, right? They have their stores only for demo, and you buy it online, right? So do you think most of these like shopping malls and all, like let's say a Gap, all these clothing stores, are they going to be more of like a demo stores physically, and then are they going to move more into the virtual and online sales?
I'd say that's about 10 years in the future. Anyone who saw the Channel 4 documentary on Meta and going into them chat rooms realizes it's not a place ordinary people want to go to. It's quite distasteful in terms of the way they think. It's like a 4chan community rather than a real-world experience. And Meta today announced they're going to lay off 150 people in their Meta shopping experience team as well. So even they're questioning how quickly this is going to happen. I think at some point in the future, you may go there to understand what an experience is going to be, but not to have the experience.
I've got two trains of thought there. One, which is we are inherently social beings, so we will always want to physically interact. And I think if the current climate has shown us anything, it's that people want experiences and they want to physically interact with one another and socialize. So unless that can be replicated, I think the physical world is going to be sort of more in more demand than the virtual world. The second is the Amazon effect of instant gratification has created a new type of consumer who wants things right now, right here. And again, unless that can be offered, you're not going to be able to kind of distinguish the virtual world in that way.
Okay, so the physical world is here to stay for a lot longer than
Let's hope so.
A few more years, yeah.
Okay, with that, let's close the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.